Hi. Hello, while we do that. That looks much better. Thanks for that introduction, Ross. Those are human beings. Let's start with this one. Cool, that looks better. Okay, so when they asked me to speak this morning, they suggested that I start with a game, which sounded like fun, so I thought we'd do a game. And what we're going to basically do is an auction. You guys have done auctions before, maybe, or at least you've seen them, so you know how they work. We've got an item that we're going to be bidding for, and the winner gets that item and pays for it. And the item in question is this over here, which is a 100 Rand note, which has frankly seen better days. So we're going to be bidding for this 100 Rand note. It's a standard auction. Whoever wins the auction gets the 100 Rand note. Just a slight switch, though, on the traditional auction model is that the person who comes second has to pay whatever their bid was, but they don't get the note. You got that? So the winner pays, gets the note. The person who came second pays and gets nothing. And they pay with the losing bid, obviously. Everybody got the rules? Can we do this? Okay, cool. So I'm going to open it up at 10 Rand. Would anybody pay me 10 Rand for a 100 Rand note? Who's first? 10 Rand. We've got 10 Rand in the back. Okay, 20 Rand. Will anybody pay 20 Rand over here? So if you win, you pay 20 Rand, you get 100 Rand. You pay 10 Rand, you get nothing. Cool. 30 Rand? Do we have 30 Rand? 30 Rand over there. Can I get 50 Rand for this 100 Rand note? 50 Rand over there. Okay. Can I get 60 Rand? 60 Rand for this 100 Rand note? 60 over there. Can I get 80 Rand? 80 Rand for the 100 Rand note? 80 Rand in the back over there. Okay. Can I get 90 Rand? 90 Rand for this 100 Rand note? Okay, 90 Rand. 90 Rand. So if you win, you pay 90 Rand, you pay 80, you get nothing. Can I get 100 Rand? Anybody give me 100 Rand? 100 Rand for the 100 Rand note? Okay, we got 100 Rand over there for this 100 Rand note. Anybody give me 110 Rand? 110 Rand over there. Can we get 120 Rand? 120 Rand, 120 Rand over there. 130 Rand. Would anybody pay me 130 Rand for this 100 Rand note? Had 130 Rand in the back over there. 150 Rand. Anybody pay me 150 Rand? There we go, 150 Rand in the back over there. Anybody pay me 180 Rand for this 100 Rand note? 180 Rand. 180 Rand going once. 180 Rand going twice. Sold for 180 Rand. You can come and settle afterwards. And the person who came second needs to settle with me as well. So that was retarded. That's the second highest price I've ever gotten for a 100 Rand note. It's a great game for me because I essentially now have made 310 Rand and parted with 100 Rand, right? The game, of course, is rigged. It's designed so that I'm going to win. And it's designed that way using a greedy algorithm that ensures using game theory. Well, actually, it's somewhat of a fascination to game theorists why this actually works. And it has to do with the irrational mindset people have around money. But using this greedy algorithm, I can make a lot of money. And actually, the only way you could have won that game was to not play it, right? That's the right answer. To go, screw you, actually, we're not going to play this stupid game because we're going to lose. The problem is, when you have money on the table, human beings start acting in a very curious way. And there's a lot of behavioral science about that we won't go into today. But I want to use this retarded auction as an example of our banking system. And in fact, the financial system that runs the world today. Because it is rigged. There are rules that have been put in place that mean that you will lose every time you play. And somebody will make a lot of money because they control the algorithm that ensures that you lose. And the only way you can play that game is the only way you can win that game is by not playing it at all. Right? Because the moment you step in to the fray, you will lose. Our current banking systems, while they're useful for things like buying carrots and going to the movies and stuff, are exploitive and they're exclusionary and they cut out a lot of the world, and we don't have to play the game anymore because we have the technology now to opt out and to just say, screw that, we're not going to play the game. It's a retarded game. I should probably elaborate, hey? Is that too short? All right. So I want to touch a little bit on behavioral science. Geez, these slides are just all over the place, right? So human beings have evolved in a curious way. It took millions of years, of course, and we spent a lot of that time running away from tigers in the forest and counting berries very quickly before we died in lots of very interesting ways, right? And a safe assumption for human beings has always been that anything new is going to kill us. That's been our relationship with new things that arrive in the environment. A little bit like the movie The Croods, right? Where the cavemen save themselves automatically just by actually doing nothing and hiding in a cave all day. Because when we discover things, and the amazing things about human beings and technologies, we discover things before we know what to do with them, and we assume they're going to kill us. So when we first found fire, we discovered that it did actually kill us, and all we knew how to do with it was burn our fingers. And then later we discovered that actually, by forcing ourselves to harness this thing, we could use it to cook food and do a whole lot of other useful things. When we first discovered electricity, we literally discovered it by being shocked, assumed it would just kill us, found out that if we harnessed it, you could switch the lights on. For a very long time, we thought that's all you could do with electricity. And you think about everything that's plugged into the electrical circuit right now, nobody saw that coming, right? And the examples go on and on. The internet, bear with me, are people who believe the internet is going to kill us still today. And of course, when it made its way into the form of a cellular phone, there's still people who think that those are very dangerous. They aren't, right? And now we've discovered that the internet is good for a whole lot of things that we had no idea about in the beginning, like sharing pictures of cats and babies, right? There's a lot of great things you can do with the internet if you get over your fear of it. But because of the way that we've evolved with technology, and especially our decision making when it comes to information technology, the human brain still gets tripped up with things like the little algorithm we employed this morning for our retarded auction, and with tricks that salesmen know very well. You see, when you can engage a particular kind of thinking, you can get human beings to give you the answer that they want instead of the correct one, and you can gear systems against them. And I'll give you just a very quick example of how that works if you employ sort of what's referred to in behavioral circles as fast thinking. I'm just going to give you a sum, and a number's going to jump into your head, and I want you to shout out the first number that you think of. So the number that jumps into your head, you just shout out, right? So I've got a bat and a ball. Together they cost 110 Rand. The bat's 100 Rand more than the ball, so the ball costs?
10 Rand.
10 Rand is the wrong answer, right? It's 5 Rand. The bat's 105 Rand, the ball's 5 Rand. Together they're 110 Rand. The bat's 100 Rand more than the ball. Now, you guys are all lang smart, so if I'd given you a few seconds, you would have engaged the slower side of your mind, the rational, analytical side, the more modern part of the human brain, and you would have arrived at the correct answer. But if I can keep you in that fast thinking mode, and if I control the way I phrase the question, I can get the answer I want instead of the correct one. And you know, this is nothing new to salesmen and bankers, like I said. They know that you can use other tricks like anchoring to sell televisions, because the way you sell a 12,000 Rand television is you put it next to a 60,000 Rand television. And we've all seen this, right? When you walk into Dion Wired or wherever, the first thing you see is that big Samsung that costs 60,000 Rand, and you're like, geez, I came here to buy a TV, but I didn't know they cost that much. And then what's hanging on the wall behind it? A TV this much smaller that costs 12,000 Rand. And you're like, what a bargain. That's so much cheaper. And we can play these behavioral science games all day. They are fascinating, they're curious, and they're something that for a very long time were used against us. They were used to take as much money out of our pockets as possible. And only recently, in the last decade or two, have we seen a new breed of company that goes, actually, we think that if we, because the world is getting smarter and learning these games, that's the bad reason for doing it, but the good reason is, if we actually start gearing our systems and our products to help you with these problems, to give you more accurate information, right? To gather that information together and give you answers that you need and make more informed decisions, we think we'll ultimately be more successful in the long term than the people who are using it to exploit you. And that's a magical idea. And it's the reason we have companies like Airbnb and Uber today, that people think of smart technology companies because they are, but actually they're very good at behavioral science, and they're customer-centric. They think of the customer in a very different way, and that's actually what sets them apart. But getting back to the world of money, this is something that goes back ages. I don't think a lot of people realize exactly how old money is. It's probably the second most useful thing we invented after language, right? And it predates writing. We've had money for a very, very long time. And we needed money for a very long time. So there's this myth that persists when you go up to people and ask them where did money come from. They tell you about the barter system, right? You've all heard of the barter system. We used to trade goods, and that's how commerce happened in the world for the longest time. The barter system is a myth because it doesn't work. It has a problem called currency, right? Which is, if you're catching fish, 10,000 years ago, I don't know why you have a fishing rod, but bear with me, and you've got 3 fish, and you go to your friend who's a pumpkin farmer, and you try and swap the fish for pumpkins, that kind of transaction relies on his pumpkins actually being grown and ready for you to eat now. Chances are he's just planted them, and he needs another, I don't know, how long does it take for pumpkins to grow? A few weeks, a month? I don't know. But you have that currency problem because the fish are going to go off. So what do? Right? Well, you give your friend the pumpkin farmer the fish, and you say, well, give me something so that I can come back later and get my pumpkins. And that could have been a seashell. We used rocks. We used bones. In fact, some of the most ancient forms of money in the world are baboon bones that have been found in Africa. And we would take that symbol, that icon, and we would use that to come back later. And it would give us currency. That's where the word comes from, right? So money is ancient. It goes back a very long way. And I'm fascinated by the different kinds of money that we evolved to use over the years. One of my favorite examples of ancient money, or something that worked with ancient money, is the tally stick. So this particular tally stick is from medieval England. And tally sticks are curious in my world because they used a natural algorithm to prevent forgery. So the way a tally stick worked was, if we wanted to do a transaction, we would go and get a lacquer stick somewhere, and then we would put notches on the stick to show the value of the transaction, and we would actually write the transaction on the stick. So the one you're looking at on the slide right now, that's a transaction for 32 sheep, and it's from around the year 1100. And then what we'd do is we'd split the stick in half, and we'd each take a half of the stick and we'd go on our merry way. And the reason they did that was because we could come back together at a later date, and we could put those two halves of the stick back together, and we could see that the grain of wood matched. And we'd know that that was the authentic other half of the tally stick. That was important because I would then take my half of the tally stick and use it to trade for other goods. So I'd say, hey, Ross owes me 32 sheep, and I would like a lot of pumpkins. I don't know how many pumpkins you get for 32 sheep, but bear with me. And then I could transfer that tally stick to somebody, and they could come back to Ross later and go, hey, I've got the 32 sheep tally stick, and they could match the grain of wood. So nature had given us a technology in the grains of wood that couldn't be forged. You couldn't fake a tally stick. You couldn't go and make a counterfeit tally stick and go and claim your 32 sheep from Ross. And it also meant that we could do these kind of negotiations and transactions person to person. We didn't need a central authority. We had the grains of wood and all the tools with us to actually conduct these transactions one-to-one. So commerce started out by being peer-to-peer. That's not a new idea. That's where money comes from, right? The idea that we need central authorities to vet transactions, to look after our money, to tell us what we're allowed to do with it and to lend it to us, that's the new idea. And it's a cuck one, right? It's a bad idea. It's useful for some things. I'm not saying we don't need central authorities at all. But generally, it creates systems of exclusion. It means that in my country of South Africa, there are 11 million people who can't have bank accounts because nobody wants to give them one because they can't get enough money from them, right? Exclusionary. It creates little pockets of people who have a license to run these algorithms and earn more money than, frankly, they need because, you know, you can't have too many houses on golf courses, etc. So it just doesn't work. And it has an inherent problem, which you're probably all familiar with, which we call the douchebag, right? It creates a world in which douchebags thrive. Because a douchebag's favorite thing is playing golf. I'm not dissing golfers, I played it once, it's kind of fun, right? But douchebags, I'm not saying all golfers are douchebags, I'm saying all douchebags like golf. Does that work? And they don't like working. And they like setting up systems that make money in the background for them doing absolutely fuck all while they're playing golf, right? That's the world it creates. Later I'll tell you how I really feel about it. But recently, we've discovered a new technology, a new innovation, something that helps us drive new efficiencies into the world of commerce. Because that's what innovation is actually about. It's about efficiency. But that's what innovation is really about. It's about finding steps in a process and then removing them. It's about finding middlemen who we actually just don't need anymore and then disintermediating them, right? That's what makes Airbnb so special, really, besides for its understanding of behavioral science and design. That's what makes Uber so special. A lot of the technologies we love today, we love because they've taken steps out of a process. And through cryptography, we've arrived at a system of commerce, potentially, and other things, that enables direct peer-to-peer transactions without these central authorities. It takes us back to that ancient way of doing money where we didn't actually need help with it, right? And it gives us a better way of doing it with math, really, and public key cryptography. And so that's fascinating because, yes, it's good for money. It means I can send anybody in this room some Bitcoin, for example, and Bitcoin's just one example. And we don't actually need any intermediaries. I can just send it straight to you. In fact, we can actually do a transaction, and I can talk you through it. Does anybody here have Bitcoin? We've got some Bitcoiners. Does anybody want Bitcoin? There, okay, first hand I saw. All right, so we've never met before, but I'm going to open up my Bitcoin wallet and click on send, and all I need is your phone number. You can see I get lots of phone numbers. I pay for them. You can type it in if you want. There you go. So you could do this with any stranger. It can be a phone number, it can be an email address. It's usually a QR code. And I'll say send to that number. I'll send you 20 Rand. All right. Use Touch ID. Have you got your phone with you? Cool. So tell us when that SMS arrives. Done. And done. You waiting? There we go. He's just received 20 Rand. I sent it straight to him. And the only two people who were actually involved in that transaction were me and him, right? The other important thing about that transaction is that I pushed the money to him. He didn't pull it from me. You see, when you use a credit card, for example, you hand over the keys for somebody else to pull money out of your world into theirs. And as you know, with credit cards, they can pull as much as they want if they know what they're doing. So you're kind of trusting the merchant to pull the correct amount to you. So that's fundamentally different. There also, depending on how you pay with a credit card, like Snapchat, for example, there'll be up to 4 companies involved in the transaction, right? There'll be Visa or MasterCard. There'll be like, did I say Snapchat? SnapScan. SnapScan. There'll be the merchant's bank. There'll be your bank. There are a lot of steps in the process, and each of them earn money for being there, right? Whereas the transaction that we just did through the blockchain, there was just me and you, and no fees really yet. Fractional small fees paid to Bitcoin miners. But that's the only fee now. Now, of course, if you want to turn that Bitcoin into 20 Rand, you're going to have to sign up for a BitX account, and then you're going to have to start engaging with the world of conventional banking, and you're going to have to pay bank fees, etc. But if we kept this money in the Bitcoin world, it would just be me and you. That would have been the be-all and the end-all of it, right? And it's magical when you start to use it and when you start to pay for things, and more retailers are starting to accept it, and there's some interesting things happening online that I want to share with you in a moment, but it's one of those things that you kind of have to experience. I remember telling a colleague of mine about Uber for the first time. He was on his way to New York, and I was like, oh, you're going to use Uber to get around. This was when Uber was still something that nobody knew about. And he was like, no, dude, I'm just going to call taxis. That's, how you get around in New York. It's like, oh, you should try Uber, it's actually better. He's like, dude, you just walk into the street and you put up your hand. How could anything be better than that? And he just didn't get it. And then he came back 2 months later and he was like, oh my God, I tried Uber, it's the best thing ever. But you had to get to that point where he had actually tried it, given it a bash and experienced it. And so that was what I spent a lot of my time at BitX trying to do, was going, guys, trust me, this rocks. You just have to try it, and trying to get people over that hurdle. Things always happen a lot slower than we think they do. There's that famous Bill Gates quotes where he goes, we always overestimate the change that'll happen in 2 years and underestimate the change that'll happen in 10 years. So I have no idea where this world is going, but I'm pretty excited about the 10-year outlook. In the 2-year outlook, things are getting, well, weird, right? So we've got this other blockchain called Ethereum that you may have heard of. The Ethereum blockchain is fundamentally the same idea as Bitcoin, but it creates this kind of derivative called a smart contract, so that beyond money, you can write any form of contract into a blockchain, and you can make it immutable. I'm leaving out the stuff about how the blockchain exactly works, because we're going to do Q&A in a moment, and I suspect there'll be a lot of questions about it there. But what Ethereum does is it goes, okay, this is good for money, but money's just a contract, and we could write any other contract into a blockchain. And they've created a framework for doing that quite easily. So for example, this is an anti-nuptial contract. So you can see it stipulates two partners, partner 1 and partner 2, and it stipulates how these two economic units will aggregate their wealth. And then at the bottom, you've got a state that equals divorced. And then it stipulates what happens when that state is reached. The interesting thing about these contracts is that contracts today are written in English, or something that resembles English. Whenever my lawyer gives me a contract, I'm like, that kind of looks like English. And when you dispute a contract, you go to court, and you have long deliberations about the language employed, right? What did this person mean? What was the letter of the law? And that takes up a lot of time and energy. But in the blockchain world, and with smart contracts, there's no real arguing. It's written in math. It's like, this is what the math said, this is how much you get, and that's how much you get, and this is the condition that we set and agreed to, and there's no real arguing with it. It does mean you have to be a lot more careful when you set up the contract, but if you do the groundwork and set up the contract properly, it becomes something that's very effective when the triggers are hit. And that changes a lot of things, especially if you're a law student. You might want to slap on a BSc on the side. Now, there are a lot of great possibilities here, but it's still the early days, and there's a big design problem in the blockchain world, right? The nerds are excited because the technology is amazing. They've built an incredible engine. It could power a Ferrari, but right now the only way you can get it is in the body of a bus. So there's a lot of design work to do to come up with the systems, the apps, the platforms that make this something that's appealing and usable for normal human beings. But we are getting there, and we're starting to see some very interesting experiments. So there's this song, for example. The music video is lovely. They've got a human throwing up a sheet. And the song's not great either. Anyway, we're not yet to listen to music, but the reason this song is so interesting is because it's the first piece of music that was encoded into the Bitcoin blockchain. The band's from Canada, they're called 22 Hertz, and they decided that as an experiment, they would take the music from this particular song called Get the Hell Out, and they would write that into the blockchain so that if there was ever a dispute over the melodies or any components of the music, they could go back to the blockchain, show that they had the PGP key for that particular record, and show that they were the ones who wrote it into the blockchain. And so they're protecting copyright using the blockchain. So in the copyright world, there's a lot of interesting things happening. There's a company in Stellenbosch that's working on media distribution and how you could write copyright for films and music into the blockchain to prevent piracy, for example, because we still have a problem with that. And on that point, I mean, you guys won't know anything about this, right? But there are still people today who download TV shows and movies from the internet. I know, it's shameful. I mean, I know none of you guys would ever try that. And of course, that's something that could get you arrested in some countries, this one included. You can actually do jail time for downloading a movie in some countries. And of course, that stopped everybody from doing it overnight, right? Nobody does it anymore. So the first question I always get when we talk about Bitcoin is, what does the regulator have to say about this? And of course, what the regulator has to say about it is important. I'm not dissing regulators. I think they have an important job to do, and a difficult job. But what I'm saying is, increasingly, it doesn't matter. Just like it didn't matter with Uber, right? Just like it doesn't matter with movies being downloaded, which I'm not an advocate for, again, I'm just using it as an example, right? Is that when you get a groundswell of people and a critical mass develops with a technology that makes it very efficient, and there's no victim and nobody's getting hurt, and you aren't actually doing anything bad to anyone else, it almost doesn't matter what the regulation says about it. And that's a controversial statement. Again, I'm not dissing the regulators. I think they have an important role to play. But I'm saying it's very difficult in this world because they've kind of been taken out of the equation when it comes to actually policing the regulation. And so that's an interesting part of the blockchain discussion as well. But if you look at this whole world of transactions and contracts emerging, it gets super exciting. You know, I look at Google, for example, and how that particular form of, let's call it an intelligence, has evolved over the last 16 years from when they first launched the Google homepage, and all of the information it has about me and how it starts connecting all of that information together. I mean, as an example, if I go to the Google app and I ask it a question like, I love talking to Google as well, let's try this. Okay, Google, when is my next flight?
JNB to CPT leaves at 1 p.m. today.
Right, so Google's got that information, right? and it knows who I am, and it can answer questions like this because it's got a horrible photo of me and it knows what my name is. I'm signed into the Google app. It knows when my flight is because it reads all my email, right? I've been using Gmail for all of my email for the last 10 years, and when you book a flight, you get a confirmation. What are the other things you get emailed to you? Hotel bookings. How do you get your bank statements today? PDF emailed to you, right? So Google could read that too if it wanted to. And this is something that scares a lot of people. You know, when I do an associated talk on artificial intelligence, and I always say, you know, if we look at all of the information that Google has about us today, and we know that it's so good at doing maths, because frankly, human beings are pretty cuck with maths, but systems like Google are amazing at it, and all of the data it has triangulated about me, it's like undeniable that Google could probably run my financial life better than I could, right? And that's when I see the generational divide. I go, so who's ready to give their bank accounts to Google? And, you know, it depends. If I'm speaking at a university, all the hands go up. If I'm speaking at a conference for CIOs, there isn't a single hand going up. And that whole generational divide is interesting. But the reason I bring that up is because I'm connecting everything in my world, from data about my flights to the airline I'm flying with, the routes I'm driving through Google Maps, etc., my Uber account, my LinkedIn network. I'm connecting all of that stuff together at central points. And the only thing missing right now is the ability for these transactions to flow freely. Because the traditional money world was never developed with the internet in mind. Bank accounts and credit cards, they did a good job for the time, but none of them saw the internet coming. We've kind of shoehorned these technologies into working with the internet, with systems like PayPal, for example, but it is a shoehorn. It is a bit of a hack, and none of these systems were designed to work that way. Whereas now, for the first time, with systems like Ethereum and Bitcoin, we have money that works in the internet. It also doesn't discriminate on amount, which is something which is very exciting to me, right? If I wanted to send somebody 20 Rand from my FNB banking, if we tried to do that today, I probably would have failed, because 20 Rand is a minuscule amount of money to do with an EFT. If I wanted to do even less than that, like a few cents or 2 Rand, I would have failed entirely. Right? My internet banking just wouldn't have allowed me to do it because it makes absolutely no sense. But I can send a few cents, I can send a few Rand as Bitcoin, and it doesn't discriminate on the amount. And that means that in this whole world I'm connecting together, where my cars, my fridges, everything else is talking to each other, I can put a payment layer over that, where everything is paying all the other devices it's speaking to for the amount of work being done. I get into the Uber car's got a wallet, and when I get out of the Uber car, I pay the car, which in the future will drive itself and be electric. It'll then go and refuel. It'll pay the refueling station from its Bitcoin wallet. The refueling station has a Bitcoin wallet. It'll pay wherever it's getting its electricity from for the electricity. When I connect my laptop to public Wi-Fi, the router will have a wallet. All of these devices that we're connecting in this Internet of Things world become economic units, right? And there's this Internet of Value that emerges as well, as all of these devices are proving how much work they're doing and being rewarded for it. And that changes the world of commerce in a massive way. It also means I get to spend more time playing video games while the computers do all the stuff in the background, which is exciting. We're also seeing interesting new ideas for companies emerge. You guys may have heard of the DAO or the DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization. It was a failed experiment, unfortunately, because as I alluded to earlier, that particular contract that was written had a big loophole in it that was exploited by a hacker, and a lot of money was extracted from the DAO, which now no longer exists. But it was an idea that we could distribute company equity and we could coordinate work without centralized management in an organization, right? And you could sign up to the DAO and you could submit an idea, and if people liked that idea, they could fund it, they could become investors in your idea, and when that idea started making profit, it would automatically be distributed through the DAO blockchain, or through the smart contracts on the Ethereum blockchain rather, and everybody would be rewarded for their work, the profits would be distributed, etc. The organization would run itself without a centralized management. And we're going to see child DAOs. There are already second generation DAOs out, and it's fascinating watching how blockchains can change entire organizations. The idea of a company is kind of being displaced as well. You can also go and earn money on marketplaces. A lot of people ask me, how can I get involved in Bitcoin today? Well, you can start earning it. And there's sites like CryptoGrind, where you can go and sign up and you can tell them what creative work you do, and people can go and commission you and pay you in Bitcoin directly for your creative work. There's also a lending company. I don't think I have a slide about it, but it's called BTC Jam. that creates a network of peer-to-peer lending. So if you want to buy something that's really expensive, we're not at the point of cars and houses yet, but let's say a really expensive camera or something for your work, you can go to BTC Jam, you can put in the amount you want to lend, and then anybody who's signed up to the network can lend you incrementally. So if I've got a Bitcoin lying around or a fraction of a Bitcoin, I could go, okay, well, I'm going to throw it into this pool for this person who's trying to buy a camera, and then I'll get paid back when they pay the loan back through the blockchain, and it'll distribute to all of the people who had lent them money, and you can kind of make money as a lender, and the relationship, again, is directly with you and the person that you're lending to, which is a massive idea. And we're seeing all of these experiments happen, but it's super early days. And what we really need right now is more people to start playing. I'm excited about the possibilities in Africa, because in Africa we're kind of mobile native, right? We look at the success of M-Pesa in Kenya. It's not something that's been replicated elsewhere. But Kenyans are totally cool with all of their money being on their phone, pretty much. And this being their primary transactional device. A friend of mine was in Nairobi, and he was sitting in a taxi at a traffic light, and a beggar came up to the window, knocked on the window, and was like, want some money? And he gave the standard South African answer of, sorry, dude, I've got no cash on me. And the beggar was like, it's fine, you can M-Pesa me money. And he held up his phone, right? So, yeah, Roach is like, okay, can't say no anymore. But Africans are cool with this idea. We're mobile natives. And you look at the way that phones are used as primary computing devices in Africa, we're kind of more ready for this world than anywhere else. And that's where Bitcoin Wallet lives. In fact, the best place to have a Bitcoin wallet is on a mobile phone, especially a modern smartphone, because increasingly these are encrypted devices that are very safe. It's possible to back up your keys in the cloud, so that even if you lose your phone, so long as you can remember the password to your backups, you can go and get a new phone and unlock your balances again. Because the big fear a lot of people have in this space is that they're going to lose access to their keys somehow. We're used to trusting central authorities like banks to look after balances and keys and things like that for us. And it's a little bit unnerving when you know that you hold the key, and if you lose it, you're going to lose access. But when you think it through, there are ways to make that super secure as well, and pretty safe. So those are some of the experiments that are happening. It's very easy to start experimenting yourself. Setting up a Bitcoin wallet literally takes a few seconds. You can print out a QR code, you can stick it on a till, and you can start accepting it immediately. If you want to get a little bit smarter, you can even plug into systems like BitX that'll allow you to get rands immediately when somebody pays you Bitcoin, so you don't even have to sit on the Bitcoin yourself if you're worried about the value. It's been very stable of late. It was the top performing currency last year, but it does still unnerve people that when you look at the graph, especially in a short period of time, it's up and down and all over the place. But that doesn't have to be your problem either. There are ways you can start playing with Bitcoin where it literally is just rails for a transaction, and you're receiving rands or whatever currency you'd prefer, almost in real time. So that's really my message, is start experimenting and start playing and start thinking about what you can do in your business to have that experience and to vet this technology for yourself, because it is easy to do and it is simple, and it's, to me, the path to a way better way of doing money than we've had before. I'm not necessarily saying that Bitcoin is the be-all and end-all, but I'm saying it's the direction we're headed in. Something might come later. It might be built on Ethereum. It could be another blockchain entirely. I personally think, given the penetration of Bitcoin, the adoption, how widely it's being used, especially in countries like China, that will be the blockchain that outlasts the others. But I'd love to have a discussion with you, if we can open up the Q&A, about your thoughts, your concerns, your questions that you have about this new technology. There are a few observations. So firstly, the interesting thing is that in the Bitcoin world, there isn't a notion of territories. There isn't a notion of I'm sending my money to another country. It's just on the blockchain, and the blockchain's kind of everywhere. It's distributed on millions of nodes around the globe. So again, when transactions are on-chain, it's quite interesting, because whether you're right here in the room with me or in China, the transactional fees for sending you money would be the same, right? Because the blockchain doesn't think in terms of territories. It's the moment you want to switch out into a fiat currency, like into yuan or into rand, that you start to, well, firstly, think about things like exchange controls in countries like South Africa that have it, and secondly, the fees start to come into it. So, I mean, when you look at how the traditional world thinks about blockchain, there's absolutely nothing concrete at the moment, but one interesting idea is, what if you, instead of the current system, which I don't really know how to describe, we used to have the gold standard, and now we've kind of got the bullshit standard. Like, politicians print money because it's Tuesday. I mean, they obviously, a lot of economic thinking goes into it, but instead of that, move to a blockchain standard where you keep your rands or whatever it is, your dollars, but you underpin that with a blockchain. So the rand becomes a cryptocurrency, and you can still have paper notes, but those tokens represent a value that's sitting on the blockchain. And there are some countries like Ecuador that have actually considered doing this, and there's a big experiment with Santander Bank. They're actually building a system on Ethereum where you would have a currency issued with notes that would work like we're used to countries' currencies working, but it would actually be transactions that were on the blockchain. I mean, if you look at how countries have reacted to this, on the one extreme we've got Japan, which acknowledges that Bitcoin and other virtual currencies are money. So they go, we recognize this as currency, and you could do whatever you want with it in Japan, pretty much. Can't pay your taxes because they won't accept it, right? That's a decision they can make. There's a big difference between currency and legal tender, which you have to accept for repayment of a debt. I don't want to get into the technicalities today. But then you've got on the other extreme China, for example, where they haven't banned Bitcoin. So citizens in China can use Bitcoin to transact and they can hold Bitcoin. But they've prevented investment in Bitcoin, and they've prevented banks from doing things with Bitcoin, for example. So that they're quite restrictive. And then there's some small countries that have banned it outright. But really regulators, and this is just my personal anecdotal observation, is regulators kind of wait and see, and they wait for a big regulator to kind of make a decision and put something in place, and they're like, cool, we'll do that. So the South African Reserve Bank's been, their take on blockchain is they're excited, there's possibility for innovation, they love what this could do for banking, etc. They like the financial enablement aspect to it, but they've issued a white paper saying we don't see this as money. It's basically fairy dust. Like, if you want to have it, that's cool, do whatever you want with it, but don't come crying to us if anything goes wrong, and we don't consider this to be currency, unlike Japan yet. So an easy way to start is to install the BitX wallet that I use to give some money to, I can't remember your name, sorry dude, Sia. But you could use the BitX wallet, and you can actually instantly buy and sell Bitcoin in the BitX wallet. You have to get the money to them first, so you can do an EFT to them as a deposit. There are some systems that take credit cards, not many that are in South Africa, but you can pretty easily get hold of Bitcoin. There's a site called Local Bitcoins that connects people who want to sell Bitcoin with other people who want to buy it for the local currency. It's very popular with travelers. So getting hold of Bitcoin's actually pretty easy. The blockchain, and without getting into the technicalities of how it works, it has a limit in terms of how many transactions can be put into a block and processed in, for example, a second, right? And if you look at how many transactions Visa is able to process, for example, it's many multiples of what the blockchain is currently capable of doing. However, that restraint isn't necessarily, it is a technical restraint, but it was put there on purpose, right? So the blockchain could be enabled, and you're probably familiar with the protocols that have been suggested for doing this. It could be enabled pretty simply, actually, to process the amount of transactions that conventional systems are. There are other philosophical, economic reasons why limits have been put on the blockchain right now. The halving algorithm, for example, that makes it more difficult over time, depending on how many people are mining Bitcoin to process transactions and extract value from the network, is there for a reason. The people, and we don't know who they are again, because the other fun thing about Bitcoin is we've got this pseudonymous character called Satoshi Nakamoto that wrote a white paper about it, and nobody knows who this person is, right? So we don't know who these people were, but they were fucking smart, because they knew that if this thing just took off like blazes from day one, all of the hacking, all of the disruption, all of the political attention would have come down on it like an avalanche, and it probably wouldn't be around anymore. They knew that if this was going to succeed, it has to happen slowly and systematically over time. And so certain blocks have been put in place to actually prevent the Bitcoin and the blockchain from becoming too popular too quickly, causing too much of a wave. And that becomes a philosophical discussion. It's a fascinating one, but the short answer is that there are numerous ways technologically that you could make Bitcoin process more transactions per second than even Visa or MasterCard do. But there are other reasons why it's limited from doing so in the short term. You're paying an estate agent for a service that's being rendered, right? So in the Bitcoin world, you don't necessarily take the estate agent out of the equation. It just means you're probably paying them with a different form of money. But yes, you could, if you look at the other costs involved in getting a loan from a bank at the moment and the insurance that you repay on it, if a peer-to-peer lending scheme like BTC Jam became the way that we lend and borrow money, then you'd be saving, massive fees off of how those kinds of transactions happen today, potentially. So there's a lot of experimenting that's going on at the moment. So there's a big bank coalition called R3 that just recently did some of their first remittance transactions using blockchain technology. The interesting thing to me is if you look at just purely the technology, I think what a lot of banks are thinking is like, yes, we need to have this blockchain thing, so we'll build our own. And that's okay, you're making a better ledger, you're replacing the old cock technology that you've got now with something that's more efficient and faster and better. But that's not why a system like Bitcoin is so special. It's special because it's distributed. It's special because we're able to do it directly with each other and make transactions immutable in the record without these central authorities. So, if the answer is actually you have no role to play in this new world, then the response will be, okay, well, give me a different answer. And right now, I think the banks are arriving at a lot of different answers. Now, I'm not suggesting we don't need banks anymore. I'm just suggesting we don't need banks for a lot of the things that they do today. Will we need somebody to protect secure keys for us? Probably. I think a lot of people would be too nervous to do it themselves. That's a role that banks could play. But I mean, if you look at the spectrum of possibilities for where this is going for banks, they're actually doing the right thing. They're waiting and seeing and they're experimenting because this wave hasn't hit them yet. But it's interesting seeing them prepare for it. All right. I think that's it. Thanks a lot, guys. It's been fun being with you this morning.